welcome to Eye on Africa, France 24's program focused on the continent. I'm Charlie James, and here's what's coming up. The year-long Ebola outbreak in DR Congo remains uncontained and risks spreading to neighboring countries. We speak to an International Red Cross director about why the response has been so challenging. Migrants traveling through Libya often fall prey to smugglers who abuse them. We bring you an Info Migrants report on the story of one girl from Ivory Coast who was sold as a sex slave. And the Africa Cup of Nations tournament reaches the semi-final round. Our reporter in Egypt gives you a preview of the big matches coming up this weekend. But we begin with a developing story out of Somalia. There are reports of a bomb attack and gun battle at a hotel in Somalia's port city of Kismayo. A Somali official says at least 10 people have been killed and that most victims were people staying at the hotel. The attack has been claimed by al-Shabaab militants. We will bring you more information as we get it. It's now been nearly 1 year since the Ebola outbreak began in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It has killed more than 1,600 people and become the second largest outbreak of the virus in history. The situation is incredibly complex, unfolding in a region affected by a 2 decades-long conflict where health workers are attacked and sometimes killed by militants. For an update on the efforts to contain this outbreak, we are joined by Emanuele Capobianco. He is the Director of Health and Care at the International Federation of Red Cross and joins us from Kinshasa. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us here at France 24.
Well, thank you for having the Red Cross on the program. The situation, as you are mentioning, is worrisome. There have been more than 2,400 cases today and 1,600 deaths. The virus keeps spreading within North Kivu and Ituri in DRC, across the border in Uganda, and threatens neighboring countries.
Would you characterize the outbreak right now as it stands 1 year later? Is it showing some signs of improvement, or is it just getting worse?
There have been improvements, for instance, in the zones of Katwa and Butembo that were extremely complex. The outbreak was somehow controlled, but in other places like Beni, where the epidemic was ongoing at the beginning and then was controlled, that's where we have now the virus coming back. And this is a signal that there has not been enough resilience built into the system, and the virus is running faster than the responders can catch it.
This week, the United Kingdom's Secretary of State for International Development called for this outbreak to be declared an international emergency. Why hasn't it already been declared, and do you think that could make a difference?
Well, the World Health Organization has a set of criteria to declare a public health emergency of international concern. The experts at the World Health Organization have not yet declared this outbreak an emergency of public health concern. But that, to me, is not necessarily the issue. This is a clear emergency, and the numbers of people affected and dead are clearly an indication that an international response on a large scale is needed to defeat this virus. And we welcome the engagement, also personal engagement with Secretary of State of the United Kingdom, who was here in DRC last week. This is an attempt to rally more partners to support the response, finance the response that will need to be sustained for the next several months.
Now, when there is a big influx of foreigners coming in to fight this outbreak, building trust in the affected communities is a huge part of your response effort. What have been the challenges and the lessons learned for your team in doing that?
Well, certainly one of the biggest challenges that we have had in this response has been the insecurity, the violence that is raging in many communities in North Kivu. The response is engaging communities and making sure that response is very much owned by the communities and the families affected by the disease. We have our teams made up of volunteers of the Red Cross that come from those communities, that understand the fears, the concerns, the needs of the people in those communities, and they try to address them, to listen first, and then to address those concerns, those needs. I think this has not always been the case, and community engagement needs to become more and more of a priority moving forward in the next months of tackling this outbreak.
Emanuele Capobianco from the International Federation of Red Cross, really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
A top African Union diplomat says a transition agreement between Sudan's ruling military council and the pro-democracy opposition is scheduled to be signed on Saturday. The announcement came just hours after Sudan's military claimed it stopped an attempted coup by a group of officers. The transition agreement sets up a joint sovereign council that will rule for a little over 3 years, during which time elections will be organized. Crowds of Algerians defied a massive police deployment on Friday to once again protest against their government. Friday marks the 21st week of the movement, and this time around, the energy was multiplied by the national football team's qualification for the Africa Cup of Nations semifinals. After celebrating all night, Algerians filled the streets of the capital, demanding an overhaul of political leadership. The demonstrators also want the establishment of independent institutions to oversee new elections. According to the United Nations, there are more than 800,000 migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers in Libya, where many dream of crossing the Mediterranean to reach Europe. But in Libya, some instead face the horrific experience of being sold into slavery. That's exactly what happened to one young girl named Miriam. She made the long journey from Ivory Coast with her 6-year-old sister, only to be sold by her smugglers as a sex slave. She made contact with Info Mingrants, which is part of the same media group as France 24. The following is an extract of an animated report telling her story.
She hasn't had her period. She was wondering if she was expecting a child and doesn't want to tell him. She's afraid he'll hit her.
Or worse.
Or worse, kill her. She can't do anything. She can't ask for anything. She can't ask for a test.
And you asked her if he's the father? There's not another man?
No, she's sure it's him. Basically, he's kidnapping her.
And afterwards he'll sell her to a smuggler?
The question is the goal to sell her afterwards?
According to her, he really wants her to cross the sea so he can buy another girl.
Almost every day, he summons me to his room and forces me to have sex with him. Sometimes he hits me on the face or on the stomach. When I don't want him to touch me, he hits me. I'm afraid to die. At the beginning, he asks for money to free me, but since I have nothing, he abuses me. He says he will kill me if I don't sleep with him. I never know what time he will come in, but when I hear the key, I'm scared. He does things to me. I don't want to talk about it. It disgusts me. I come from a small village in the Ivory Coast. For several months, I've been locked up in a man's house in Tripoli, Libya. It's a fairly residential area. The door is locked. I don't know his name. I call him the Monsieur. He's about 40. He's not married. He lives alone. Me, I'm nearly 17. The Monsieur has told me to stay quiet. He says if I try to run away, he will kill my little sister. My 6-year-old sister is with me. He doesn't touch her. He's promised not to. I don't know if she understands what's going on. She doesn't talk much anymore. Do you think it's bad that she stopped talking?
And you can find the full report on Miriam's story on the Info Migrants website. Finally, on the program, the Africa Cup of Nations tournament underway in Egypt is down to just 4 teams. On Sunday, Algeria, Nigeria, Senegal, and Tunisia will fight to make it to the final. Our sports editor, Simon Harding, is covering all the excitement in the host nation and sent us this look at what's ahead.
Egypt holds its breath. It's crunch time now in the Africa Cup of Nations as the final 4 of the competition have qualified for the semi-finals. Senegal, Nigeria, Tunisia and Algeria have all made it to the semi-final stage with mouth-watering ties in store. On Sunday, the action will start as Senegal take on Tunisia. Sadio Mane and co are favourites there against the Eagles of Carthage, who have produced their best performance in the quarterfinals, beating Madagascar 3-0 to end a fairy tale adventure for the Barres. But Alain Giresse and his team will be the underdogs in a game where Senegal are expected to come through and make it to the final. In the other match of the semis, it will be the showpiece event between Algeria and Nigeria. The Fennecs have been by far the most impressive side here in Egypt, scoring 10 goals and conceding just 1, even though Jamel Belmadi will have to play without one of his star players, Youssef Attal, injured in the Fennecs' victory against the Ivory Coast in the quarters, whereas the Super Eagles with Ahmed Moussa will have to try and surmount the impossible task it seems to beat Algeria, even though they will have plenty of chances, the Super Eagles, who have gone from strength to strength in this Africa Cup of Nations.
Do stay with France 24. More news coming up next.